we'll get into raw milk 100%, but I'm genuinely curious about your story first and foremost. I would love to hear sort of the wave tops of how you got to where you are today from where you were being 20-year old, however far back you want to go, really.
Yeah. I grew up in the 60s. My mom was kind of a Dell Davis nutrition fanatic. So she was always pushing cod liver oil and whole food nutrition on me when I was a kid. But my first job out of high school, I was a welder in a mine making some money to go to college. And I saw a guy get hit in the head with a timber. And the paramedics flew in with a nurse in a helicopter. And the rotor wash and the excitement of the orange jumpsuit just got me too excited. And so I went off and got my pre-med taken care of, became EMT1, EMT2, and then a paramedic. I taught paramedic medicine for the health department for a few years. I got my pre-med taken care of. And I ran 16,000 paramedic calls over 16 years. And I held every position you can imagine. I was a flight medic. I was a rescue medic. I was a HR director. I recruited paramedics. I taught paramedics. I was a director of operations. All that came to a screeching halt in 1996 when my grandparents passed away and left 1,000 acres to my brothers and I. I've been doing a little bit of hobby farming on the side on the farms, but we took it over. But we were very conscious that we were going to be very, very careful in how we became farmers. We wanted to be fully differentiated. We wanted to be consumer connected. And that grew very rapidly 2 years later into what is now Raw Farm, where we sell our raw milk directly to people versus to a processor. And that was really fundamental. My first contact with customers was down in Los Angeles with James Stewart at the Rossum store. And there's a big story about Rossum, but we won't get into that too much. But exciting that I got to know people and why they would want to drink raw milk. And from that, I joined the International Milk Genomics Consortium at UC Davis and I became the only farmer in the room filled with 120, 130 PhDs studying lactation, milk, genomics, lipidomics, everything you'd ever want to know about milk for the last 12 years. And so I became the ultimate educator for the farm to consumer educator for raw milk. And then you can't talk about raw milk without really focusing on food safety and understanding the diversity of bacteria, which is so incredibly important for your gut and microbiome, but also not having pathogenic bacteria. And so that's become kind of a focus of what I do is not only the nutritional and bioactives component, but also the food safety and how farmers can produce raw milk safely, low risk for consumers so they can enjoy the bioactives found in raw milk. So that's a real quick snapshot of my life. I've got a lot more I could say, but that's the snapshot.
Yeah, maybe next time if we do a round two, we'll get more into that because I'm sure there's so many stories and lessons in there that we could dive into. But for the purpose of this conversation, you already mentioned the word raw milk. It might be one of the most villainized, stigmatized things in food right now, like in the Western food arena, you could say. This might be starting at the end, but I'm curious. Why is it so villainized? Because I'll say something from my personal experience. I've eaten raw liver. I've eaten raw. I get my steaks rare. I've eaten raw meat. I've eaten tartare. I've eaten sushi. I've eaten all these raw foods. But when I first started telling people I was a raw milk enjoyer, it was like, yo, you can't do that. You got to stop that. Right. So I'm just curious, why do you think it's so villainized?
Well, I know I've experienced it deeply. We are under constant attack by the FDA. The FDA has deep connections to the universities, to the media, to big dairy interests, and also pharmaceutical interests. We have to look back in history a little bit to the 1860s, 70s, and 80s to understand that a lot of people died from raw milk from specific kind of dairies in downtown Boston, Philadelphia, New York, even in England, London, England, and in Moscow, Leningrad. There were these brewery dairies. Brewery dairies fed their cows distillers grains, and they didn't get sunshine, and the water wasn't clean. There was no pasture. It was a filthy environment. So you had typhoid fever and brucellosis and tuberculosis and everything else you can imagine. It was filthy and no way to chill the milk or test the milk. So it was called the milk problem. And the solution that came about in 1893 was brought in by Nathan Strauss from France. It was the parboiler, or the early forms of pasteurization. And it was just cook the living hell out of it, and then people would not die. Well, it worked. You had filthy milk, you cooked it, and fewer people died. You still have problems with the fact that some people died because the water quality was so bad, and it was contamination from cross-contamination, water quality. But anyway, it was a solution. Now, in 1893, another guy by the name of Henry Coit, doctor, a physician, a pediatrician, who'd lost a son to typhoid, said, I know that raw milk is really, really, really good for children if it's clean, if it comes from farms that care about how they produce their milk. And he established something very important called the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions in 1893. And that organization thrived very, very well and did very well for about 40, 50 years until the mid 1940s, 50s. And what it did was it designated dairies with high standards and did testing to assure that there were not contamination in the milk, and that the cows were tested to be TB free and brucellosis free, and they didn't have typhoid and all that stuff. And that milk was going to the Mayo Clinic. It was on the Titanic. It was going to the White House. It was delicious. Everybody loved it, but it was expensive. It was not easy to make. There were physicians that wrote about it. Porter wrote a big book about how you used raw milk to heal and cure and do all kinds of wonderful things for the immune system. Well, that whole thing kind of got suppressed and killed off in the 1930s and 40s. So less and less of the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, or the AAMMC dairies, continue to exist. And the last dairy was Altadena Dairy in Los Angeles in May of 1999 was their last quart of raw milk from Stevie's Dairy in Altadena. Well, I picked up from that. I got to know the Stevies. I got to know the Altadena story and picked up from that because people wanted their milk raw. They wanted it safe. And we have a lot of really, really good technologies now to be able to do the testing rapidly and also understand the right conditions. And from that, we've actually established the Raw Milk Institute to train farmers. But the reason that the FDA hates us so much is because they established the pasteurized milk ordinance back in the 1920s and 30s, where you could take milk from 20 or 50 or 100 different dairies and commingle it all together. And as filthy as it is, render it relatively safe because you cooked it. So this was the ultimate step forward for commercialization and made milk very cheap. And it also extended shelf life because it killed off the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria. And it also made the protective functional proteins that are so bioactive inert. So that the enzymes didn't work. Everything was just kind of suspended in animation and embalmed the milk. It killed it. So with that said, the industrial revolution and all the big infrastructure to consolidate industry and make this big commercially branded pasteurized milk that was so much better for you and so much good, was promoted. And it suppressed the raw milk bioactives and all the fantastic health-giving properties of living whole milk with its functional proteins and enzymes and all those anti-inflammatory properties and bioactives. And so what you've got is the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance and the National Conference of Interstate Milk Shipments, which is the organization which coordinates all the processors together. And guess who sits as the king at the top of that? The chairman is the FDA. So the FDA, and I've been in that room. I know, I've experienced it. In fact, I did a speech once at the National Conference of Interstate Milk Shipments down in Florida in 2007 in front of the entire group, hundreds of processors. And up front were the Danone and yogurt people, which was kind of interesting. I gave them a compliment for having some life in their products. But I heard from one of the people listening to me speak, they said, you could have heard a pin drop. It was like you'd yelled, there is no God in a Catholic church. And it was like, that's the kind of paradigm disconnect there is between raw milk and pasteurized milk. So this is a really tough time because the FDA hates my guts, can't stand me. If you look at MSN every morning, there is a connection to some terrible thing about raw milk. But what we find is that that's crying wolf. In California, raw milk is entirely legal, high standards, testing, all kinds of stuff, and it's extremely favorable. And people drink the heck out of it and love it. It's in 550 stores. And the state has policies for it. They don't support it a lot, but there are policies that are there, right? And we get a lot of state support. So when you have the crying wolf effect, where the FDA is just pounding on you any way they can, any angle they can, but they don't regulate raw milk in California. California regulates it. The consumers begin to hear the FDA is just crying wolf again because my experience with raw milk is very, very good. So I'm going to start ignoring the FDA. In fact, we've had a few influencers have said consuming raw milk is giving the third finger to the FDA because whatever they say, I'm going to do the opposite because that's safer. Because they're the ones that have approved all kinds of crazy things in our food, which are horrible for us. So you see this disconnect between the FDA and consumers that follow influencers like yourself and others, Dr. Paul Saladino and others, that say, wait a minute, this is really good for me, and the FDA says it's bad for me? Who am I going to believe, the farmers or the pharmacies or the FDA? And the bottom line is it's farmers over pharmacies. And it's my responsibility to produce it safely and to do all the things that are very consumer protective. But our markets are thriving. We've never had higher sales than we've had today, with growth 35% year over year, 3 years in a row since COVID. So the FDA hates our guts because they are losing 5.5 dairies a day in America. Pasteurized milk thing is not doing well for them. Now, they're not losing cows, they're losing dairies, which means that they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, huge, 20, 40, 50,000 cow dairies now, and consolidating completely into the big brands, which are using ultra high temperature pasteurization, not just the low, slow stuff, but the ultra high, which just gives you a long shelf life and really dead food. So you can see it's like we're living on different planets between the FDA, CDC, NIH, and ourselves. But one thing I will say that I do have respect for, AI, artificial intelligence, if you were to ask ChatGPT about raw milk, it would tell you the truth. I'm very impressed by that. It would say, yes, raw milk has all these wonderful bioactives that are anti-tumor, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, anti-hypertensive, anti-inflammatory, good for asthma. It would say all those things, and then it would say at the bottom, it would say, but the FDA warns that there could be safety issues. And I think that's a very fair assessment. So it's very interesting to see that the NIH, the CDC, has a huge number of studies done on raw milk, done mostly in Europe, that are posted there to read. They're technical. People don't go generally read them, but they talk about all these wonderful bioactives and all these things that are found in raw milk. But yet the FDA absolutely ignores it, suppresses it, doesn't want anything to do with it because they have a political bed partner with their pasteurized milk ordinance people and the big industry that's losing out right now. So we have yet to ever have a meeting with the FDA. I begged them for meetings multiple times per year in the last 20 years. They refuse to meet with us because if you meet with me and you will look at all the studies and you have a rational conversation, a rational person is going to have to conclude that yes, if raw milk is safe or made safer, then it's a fantastic food. They don't want to come to that conclusion where we've already drawn that conclusion, and so have the consumers. So that's a long story short on why the FDA hates my guts.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a good thing, number one. If the FDA doesn't like you, you're probably doing something right. One thing that I listening to you talk with Harry and Brett and other podcasts and just hearing that 10-minute conversation just now, it is evident that you are incredibly passionate about this, particularly raw milk. There's so many different things that you can be passionate about as it relates to health and all that, like the different types of diets, all this stuff, but you've devoted much of your life to the evangelism, more or less, of raw milk. I'm curious why you're so passionate about. Why is it the hill that you're dying on, or that you're living on, rather?
It's the hill I'm thriving on.
Yeah.
It's interesting. As a paramedic, I brought advanced medicine acutely to critically ill people on scene, in their house, in their car, wherever they were. 10 children every day die in America from asthma. I had some of those kids in the back of my ambulance, and I'm very thankful that none of them died on me, but intubation, CPR, epinephrine, various different treatments, Alupet inhalers, as their parents were just crying, I don't want to lose my daughter, I don't want to lose my son. And here I am working, sweating my butt off, trying to save this child's life. That leaves deep emotional wounds in a paramedic that's compassionate and has humanity. I am very, very happy that now I can go about preventing that because raw milk is a very, very powerful asthma preventative. The studies in Europe are very clear about that. So all those deep wounds have an exit. They have a way to express themselves now by passion through prevention in whole food nutrition and the bioactives found in raw milk, which are very, very good for kids with asthma. That's just one narrow segment of what I'm talking about. But in every patient I would see, except for the trauma patients, that's a different discussion. But if you think about diabetes, you think about asthma, allergies, hypertension, cardiac disease, inflammation-driven diseases. You think about seizures and all the neuro problems with transmitters, the gut-brain stuff, mental health things. All those things have a link back to the gut, have a link back to nutrition. And in every home I ever would go to, without one exception, I'd have my partner go check in the refrigerator to see what kind of food they had. And there was no good food. You'd have Diet Pepsi in there, right? You'd have sugar and donuts and junk and pre-prepared foods. Just no raw milk.
Almond milk.
But there was always, pasteurized milk. You would always see a pile of medications, quite a few of them, by the bed or in their night chest or wherever they were. So you saw that linkage that people were dying and diseased and unhealthy, not eating any good food, but are just packed filled with medications. So that leaves an impression on a young man. And when he gets an opportunity to do something about it, that's what we did.
I can imagine. I've never been a paramedic or been in that experience or that situation. I can imagine that type of environment, especially repeated over time, an aware person, you start to pick up patterns, right? You're like, okay, well, this, and this happens when this happens. So then you start to pick up patterns. One thing that I've been taught, especially as my health journey, you could say, has veered from the mainstream, becoming the person that you mentioned earlier that says, if the FDA approves it, I'll probably go ahead and look into other options, is the idea of following money. That's been paramount and really in the forefront of I was told, I can't remember who told me that, but hey, follow the money. And so I started doing that. Why would the FDA, it's sort of related to that. Why would the FDA, I think I know the answer, but why would the FDA be so staunch in its hatred and like antagonism of you and raw milk in general?
We are showing that what is impossible is absolutely possible. We're showing that the billions and billions of dollars that are invested in the pasteurization technology doesn't apply to us. And we go directly from farmer to consumer and avoid the processing plant, which have a massive investment in the stainless steel systems and electronics and everything else, to take that milk and process the living heck out of it to make their products. We don't need that. We're saying we don't need that. We're using PCR testing to test the end product and the conditions we have to assure that the milk is safe for human consumption. And that completely disrupts their entire paradigm of 100 years of thinking. Their policies, their regulations, their statutes all run contradictory to what we've done. I'll tell you a favorite story I have real quickly about follow the money. There was a study released in December 8th of 2021 by Dr. Lin at Cornell University. And this was funded by, guess who? Our best friends, the National Dairy Council, the big processor guys. Funded by them and dairy checkoff dollars. And what did it do? It recognized that post-COVID, people were trying to find the bioactives in raw milk because they were so incredibly antiviral. They were very important in terms of controlling virus and the cytokine storms, and all these other wonderful things, that anti-inflammatory, all the things I talked about earlier. And so they set about studying how they could go take out of raw milk these bioactives before the heating, before processing, because processing kills the bioactives. It makes them inert. So massive, massive study, millions of dollars spent on this thing. And you have some of these big processors trying to extract these bioactives out of raw milk, the raw whey protein, lactoferrin, the butterfat membrane, all these things that are in there. And they're having a really hard time because when they get them out and they concentrate them and make into a new patented pill or drug or potion or food or something to make money, thank you very much, they don't work very well. Because they don't work very well outside of the matrix and the blueprints of life. So they work best in the balance of the matrix that Mother Nature's given us over 100,000 years of mammalian evolution to be the optimal food to build an immune system in the gut microbiome. But when you take parts of it out and you try to do something with it, they don't work very well. They may work a little bit here and there, but they don't work very well in terms of the whole. So they're very frustrated with the fact that they can't upset the paradigm of Mother Nature, and they're trying to extract these bioactives. And that's something that I think is a follow the money story. It's unbelievable because they recognize and acknowledge the value of raw milk, but they'll never speak of it because they're talking about the bioactive elements in it that they want to take out and make into new pills and potions. So I hear this, the presentation in Cork, Ireland last year, when I was the only farmer in the room at the International Milk Genomics Consortium, and here the PhD that runs the National Dairy Council is talking about all these bioactives they're trying to take out of raw milk. And I met with this guy. I met with him. I sat down and I said, why don't you just pay the farmer more, clean up the raw milk, redo your processing procedures so you bring the milk into a different kind of process where the milk is rapidly chilled, segregated, and never commingled, do testing and this and that. He goes, no, that's not what we're working on. That's not what we're working on. The processors don't want to do that. The almost exact words were the processors don't want to do that because they can't isolate those dairies and they can't do what you're talking about. So we know that this is follow the money big time. And we are taking money away from a paradigm which is 100 years entrenched. And whenever you take money away from an established paradigm, you've got a revolution on your hand because they don't want to have that loss.
Yeah, because there's a lot of correlation between the money and the power that they hold, right? And if you take the money away, perhaps you're taking some of their precious power. I'm curious. I don't know the general gist of traditional like pasteurized milk processes. I would love if you could walk me through the like start to end from the cow. Like how are they like the traditional?
Excuse me, just a brief second. Be right there.
Yep.
Had customers in our front yard there. We're selling a bunch of product. Anyway, take us through what now?
Well, that's a good sign that you got customers right there. That's good. So I'm curious, like if you could take me through, you mentioned these like massive dairy farms with 40, 50,000 cows that you mentioned. What's the process from like those cows being raised? How are they raised to getting put in a grocery store? Like what, because I honestly don't know anything about the steps in between how that works. Sure. So if you could walk me through that, that'd be great.
Well, they use GMO feeds that are genetically modified. They use a lot of antibiotics to keep the cows, quote, healthy, when it actually just puts them into a real tailspin in terms of their gut microbiome. They expect tremendous amounts of milk out of the cow. We're talking about 12 to 14 gallons a day per cow, which is a huge amount of milk. Milking 3 times, sometimes even 4 times per day. The cows burn out at 3 years old and are sent to slaughter. So that milk, and sometimes there is some hormones being given to the cows, although that's lesser. It's happening less now than before. That said, that milk gets commingled together with other dairies. And the cleanliness of the udder is not that critical because it doesn't matter how clean the milk is because it's all going to get cooked. It's going to go through something called bacterifugation. Bacterifugation separates the solid manure pieces and all that kind of stuff out and tries to reduce the bacteria counts just by centrifuging. It's like cream separation. So it goes through a lot of processing, and then it also goes through high heat 2 or 3 or 4 times to kill the pathogens in there, in the bad bacteria, to extend shelf life and get rid of all these enzymes, which would actually help digest the milk itself. And all the functional proteins are destroyed. And they use ultra high temperature pasteurization. So all this milk is brought in from all these different dairies together. Their standards allow for pathogens. They don't even measure them because they're allowed.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So there's these massive cow operations. They're getting fed GMO foods, antibiotics, and all those sorts. They're getting milked a bunch, and that milk's basically just getting compiled. And then is that getting shipped to a processor, or is there processors on the farmers usually?
They don't process on farm. It's extremely rare that they do that. I don't know of any.
So they're shipping it. They're getting it and they're shipping it.
All that milk gets put into big 6,500 gallon trucks and brought to a centralized creamery where they make products. And there's these 150, 200,000 gallon tanks that take all this milk and commingle it all together. And the bacteria counts in this milk are off the charts, sometimes too numerous to count. It's disgusting. It's actually a great quote here from Dr. Bruce German. Pasteurization is an 18th century solution to an 18th century problem. Well, they're perpetuating the 18th century problem by commingling all this milk together and having it filthy because now they can excuse it, right? Mm-hmm. They excuse it with technology. But the farmers are getting paid so little for the milk that they're going bankrupt. That's why you're losing 5.5 dairies a day. And they make these massive 100,000 cow dairies and 50,000 cow dairies and 20,000 cow dairies, highly efficient, that connect themselves with a brand so that brand can do well. And there's a kickback between the brand and the dairy. So consolidation, it goes to the big creamery where it's pasteurized, homogenized, bacteriophage gated, pasteurized several times, then put into UHT, ultra high temperature pasteurized, not the low temperature, but the high temp to give it long shelf life. And then it's distributed broadly. And it also goes to the stores, goes to the kids' cafeterias at schools where the kids throw it away. They don't even drink it. Mm-hmm. It's a law that the kids all get a little pint of it and they all throw it away. Nobody's drinking it. Unless it has maybe a lot of chocolate added or sugar or something, and then they may drink it. So it doesn't do very well for kids. It triggers asthma. It's highly allergenic. It's hard to digest. It's sugar because they put some sugar in it. And it doesn't have any bioactives, so it doesn't do anything for inflammation in the child. And it doesn't taste very good, so kids don't want to drink it. You give a kid fresh, delicious raw milk that's chilled, and they'll guzzle it. They can't stop drinking it. They love it so much. We know that because there's schools that give it, in the private school area here in California, they give it and the kids consume it. They just ravenously want more. So it's interesting to see how this highly processed foods, the kids reject it. So that's kind of the process of what happens from the farm to the consumer on the CAFO side. On our side,
what does CAFO mean, if you don't mind?
Confinement animal feeding operation. It's actually a term used to define these massive areas where there's no pasturing going on, there's no sunshine. The cows are basically kept inside most of the time.
Gotcha. So that's the CAFO side. What's your side? Like, what's the process look for a raw milk producer like yourself?
Well, many fewer cows, so you have less pressure on the cows. The cows are milked twice a day, not 3 or 4 times a day. The cows are expected to only put out 5 to 7 gallons a day versus 10 to 12. So they're going to last a lot longer, and they have a stronger, more robust immune system themselves because they're not being stressed. So smaller footprint, not as many cows. They get pasture access, especially seasonally in the spring, fall, and sometimes the winter, sometimes the summer. But if it's super hot, we keep them in the shade because it's too hot. So a lot of individual care to each individual cow because we want to make sure each individual cow is healthy because that's critical to the end product. A lot of work is done to make sure that when the cows come in to the milk barn to be milked, their udders are very, very clean. So when you put the machine on, the udders are extremely clean, and a lot of testing going on at the udder right there to make sure that the milk is safe. And then the milk goes down a very, very clean pathway to a chiller where it's chilled down below 40 degrees. It actually goes to 36 degrees within literally 2 minutes. And then it goes into a silo tank where the additional testing goes performed. And then that milk goes to our creamery where it's never commingled with anybody else's milk anywhere. It's only our milk. We have to take full responsibility for the milk, so you can never commingle it. We use PCR testing, and we get data back in about 26 hours, 28 hours. It's going to go down to 20 hours here in about another 3 or 4 weeks. We're doing our own testing on farm versus a lab. We're actually building our own on-farm lab with it's called the Thermo Fisher process. Thermo Fisher has PCR. It's a technology. And it's extremely exciting because we're going to get data in 20 hours, which allows us to make a lot more decisions earlier in the process. That said, it's an entirely different product, an entirely different food, safety practices, connection to consumers, farmer education. I mean, we get touring like crazy. We have lots of people coming wanting to see their farmer, right? See their food. If you look at the economic reality of a farmer that's on a CAFO versus on our farm, I get consumers coming in wanting to know more. They want to give me a big hug. They're filled with tears that they're feeling so good and their asthma's gone away or whatever it is. Crohn's is resolved. And they want to know us. They want to care for us. They pay us well because we set our prices ourselves. So economically, we're thriving. Socially, we're thriving. You go to a farmer that's on a CAFO, he doesn't know any customers. He has signs that say no trespassing, trespassers shot, survivors shot twice, right? That kind of thing. And then he's not paid. He's paid 17, 18 bucks a hundredweight. He makes 26 to 27 just to break even. So he's in economic desperation. He doesn't know anybody, so he's socially alienated. And he thinks of customers as PETA lovers or something, you know? And so it's a totally different world for the farmer themselves. And I know a lot of raw milk dairymen, and all of them are thriving.
That's incredible. It's an interesting juxtaposition to have to now understand both of those processes like side by side. One thing, so I spoke with Will Harris down at White Oak Pastures, who you may know of, and you just mentioned a word that he said a lot, which was efficiency when referring to the CAFO or the mass big ag system, and how efficiency is like the enemy of I don't want to say proper, but like I guess I'll say like the right way to do it. And another word he said is like instinctive behaviors, which is something that you mentioned as well, like not getting milk to like what'd you say 4 or 5 times a day for 14 gallons, being able to be uh, treated more instinctively, and the cows are and the livestock are able to express instinctive behaviors, which to me, if a cow can express instinctive behaviors and live in an instinctive and natural way, it would make sense that the cow would remain healthy because that's the way that, as you mentioned, it's evolved. And now I'm trying to tie these threads together. The whole reason we pasteurize them in the first place is because we crammed these cows together in non-instinctive and not natural environments. So they got non-natural and non-instinctive, not like anti-evolutionary diseases and things. And then we had to create that solution. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how it's like tying in my mind.
That is part of the whole picture, yes. And then there's something that's kind of a bad joke, but it's so true. It's always cheaper if you steal it. The farmers themselves are their own worst enemies. In Canada, they fixed this problem back in 1965 with their supply management program, where the farmers revolted. They said, nope, not another drop of milk going to the processors until we get what our costs are plus a little bit of profit and be sustainable. And that's what happened in Canada. And the farmers there are thriving. They're doing really, really well. Farmers are wealthy. And they're not doing raw milk, unfortunately, but at least they have a system where the farmers are acknowledged and part of the power system at the table. And the processors actually do quite well too, because their supplies of milk are stable. In the United States, we've never been able to do it. As farmers, for some reason, the farmers have never been able to get together in a collaborative effort to say, nope, we're going to shut down and make this thing work for us. They've never done that. They've always had the big guys say, I'm going to just hold out because the little guys will go away and I'll be king of the mountain. Well, that happened back when you had 50 to 100 cow dairies, and I'll be the 150 cow dairy and be big. Well, now it's happening with 1,500 cows and 5,000 cow dairies, and the 5,000 cow dairies are going out of business for the 15,000 cow dairies. So it's this ever-evolving, de-evolving kind of Rome collapsing kind of thing that we're seeing. And it's really quite sad because farmers should always stand together and work for consumers versus processors.
That's such an interesting point. And one thing that you just brought up that made me remember my conversation with Will Harris as well is the idea that, so he went from being a commodity farm, like they basically raised cows, they raised them to a certain amount and then shipped them off to wherever they got processed and sold by somebody else. And the paradigm shift that he made, which was so impactful in the way that I perceive it, is he went from being a tiny sliver of the entire supply chain to an entire smaller supply chain, which is the exact same thing that you guys are doing. You guys, and this is another thing that you said too, is the responsibility. Basically, he took responsibility of the entire animal, the entire process. That's what y'all are doing as well. Well,
in COVID, February, March of 2020, we saw a stress test of our food system. And what we saw in California was the pasteurized dairy products evaporated from the stores. There was none. It was literally none. And they would come in frequently with the trucks because the dairies were actually dumping their milk in the lagoons because the processors couldn't retool to stop feeding the institutions and the restaurants. Like schools closed, restaurants closed, and only the supermarkets were open. They couldn't retool to bottle more milk in different containers and different labels and different palleting and different distribution. It took them 60 to 90 days to do that. So for that period of time, we retooled in literally 2 hours. When we went to our first store and they said, we're out of milk, we said, fine, more is on the way. And we were able to adapt and we're resilient immediately when the big guys just crumbled. We utilized all of our milk. We stopped making cheese. We started making our kefir and our raw milk. And we literally go to a store and there were no dairy products on the shelf. And we had dumped all of our products on the shelf versus in the back. They didn't have to restock because all those sitting up front. And we had the entire shelf space to ourselves for like 3 months in some stores. And so it's interesting how the resiliency and the ability to adapt to stresses, especially pandemic, which was pretty dramatic, came from the smaller operators and ourselves. They can adapt and we're resilient. So you make a very good point about resiliency and being able to take care of people directly and be able to listen to the customers in the marketplace and make changes quickly.
It's so interesting to me, given the political climate of California and other states that I've lived in, like Georgia, Texas, Florida, things like that. It's almost a little bit surprising to me that California is on the cutting edge of the raw milk space. I think it's the most, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's like the most avant-garde, most forward pushing in the raw milk space. Would that be fair to say?
I would give a little bit of credit to California, and I would also give a lot less credit to California, both ways. I give credit to Altadena. Altadena was the last AAMMC certified dairy in the world. When they closed, the AAMMC, the certified raw milk thing went away. But in the California legislature, in our laws, our Food and Ag Code has the AAMMC regulations embedded in it. And they were never overturned. And so it was Altadena that stood guard at the gate. They were the guardians of the gate that kept the pasteurized people from just taking over California. And they would have loved to do so. So I give the credit to Altadena for standing there. They had lobbyists. They had people that loved their products in the legislature that defended it to make sure that it didn't get thrown out with everything else. And so other states didn't do that. The pasteurized people won over early on, 70 years ago, and destroyed all the original raw milk laws that were there and for themselves made exclusive laws just for pasteurization. Those are following one by one right now. We see Delaware's changing the law. Minnesota is going to have us on their legislative link here in a few weeks. We've had Iowa change their law. We've had Louisiana change the law. Montana change the law just in the last 3 years. So they're changing. I do give credit for California that they treat us fairly and that Dr. Stephen Beam and others have done a great job of treating us fairly. And that's all I can expect. I give them credit for that. But the laws are pretty strict, but they're fair. And so we just have to be on our game, and that's what we do. More raw milk being sold in California than anywhere else in the world. We're producing 85,000 gallons of raw milk a week between our two dairies that we operate and own. And about 60% of that's going to fluid, a little bit more than that with kefir. But that's going to a lot of households. And when people experience raw milk, they start telling other people. And what happens when they do that is there's an interstate jealousy that occurs. Because let's say you've got a sister that lives in Las Vegas and you live in LA and you've got a raw milk all day long and she's got kids that want this and she can't get it. She gets pissed off. Mm-hmm. It's like that really causes a lot of tension to want to equilibrate and want to make things normal and equal. And people say, is this democracy? Don't we have equal rights? Don't we have equal access to food? Aren't we all the same citizens in this great country of ours? And people say, maybe it's not that fair. And so people get upset and they want to have equal access to these foods which are very healing. And I see a lot of tension with that. And the FDA is fighting that like crazy right now.
What's it going to take to get a mass, I guess reversion would be the real way, because it's like it's how it was and and then we implemented that 18th century solution that you're talking about. What's it going to take to get the like a mass reversion to maybe more aligned with what California is doing, or even better for all these states? Because you mentioned a handful, but there's 50 total, and that's really still a pretty small fraction.
I think it's happening as we speak. More than you really realize. COVID was a wake-up call. When the doctors say, don't come to the hospital, we can't help you, we don't have a vaccination or any treatment for you, you're basically screwed, you're on your own. People said, wait a minute, I don't want to be immunocompromised. I want to have a strong immune system that's adaptive and resilient to the next threat that's coming. And raw milk has tremendous power to be able to do that, along with whole food nutrition, by the way. It's raw milk plus whole food nutrition, not just any old garbage you would drink or eat. So I think that's happening right now. And by the way, I don't think it's going to be going back to the way it was. I think it's going to be going forward to the way it should be. We have a compromised state of microbiome in our gut today because of the antibiotics we've consumed, the sterilized foods. We have a long way back on the path to go. So it's not going to be the biodiversity of the 1920s and 30s, which was acceptable. It's going to have to be the biodiversity of the 2025 and beyond, which includes all the good bacteria and background bacteria without pathogenic bacteria. because pathogenic bacteria can make people sick. And the one thing that's going to slow raw milk progress is going to be people getting sick from raw milk. So you have to make it safe or safer or safe enough, low risk, in order to have it continue to make its progress. Which is really, really cool. If you look at your cell phone here, Steve Jobs gave us kind of an interesting blessing in its own weird way. The technology is rapidly advancing. So we can do pathogen testing and get good AOAC, FDA type approved technology results in less than 24 hours. And so with that kind of technology, you have a known product you can sell. Your liability goes down to next to nothing, literally almost zero. It's not zero, but it's close. And you actually exceed pasteurization standards in terms of validating safety. Remember that pasteurization, a lot of things get through it. The bacillus bacteria, which causes about 63,000 people a year to get sick from the spores that survive pasteurization, are not good. They come from the unhealthy conditions the cows are in and all that kind of stuff. So we can actually evolve ourselves, and I think we're already doing it. There's been 82 people that have died from pasteurized dairy products, ice cream and dairy products in the last 35 years. 82. More people have died from water than raw milk in America, according to the CDC. There's been like 4 or 5 people that died from some water contamination, bottled water. And raw milk's had maybe 2 in the last 35 years. So we have a compromised immune system in place, and we have to work back to build that back. If you think about the farm and the city dweller with the environment they're in, and the farmer kid out here with petting cats and cows and sunshine, and he's having some dirt on them, their immune systems are completely different. And what people were saying is, I want more of that farm-like environment immune system because I don't want to be subject to the next bug that comes along. I want to be adaptable and resilient. And so that's what consumers are doing consciously right now to do that.
It's incredible. The thing that it always comes back to money, I guess. It's just interesting how that happens. And it's good to hear that you think somebody who's in this space and really leading the space, sees it in such a positive way. Like you're seeing that firsthand with obviously so much more nuance and understanding than somebody like myself could understand. And one thing you mentioned, the CDC, I did a little research of my own probably 6 months ago, just because I was curious. I think I remember the study that I saw was like there's been 11 since from 1998 to 2018. This was from the CDC website. The numbers might be a little skewed, so don't quote me on that. But it was like 11 hospitalizations from raw milk contamination per year in that 20-year period, and I think the number of alcohol-related deaths per day were like 300. And so to me, it comes down to like this. I think it's like it's a facade that it's about safety because alcohol is extremely regulated, but it's also extremely pushed. Like I could go to any store that you see right now and get alcohol and drink myself to death, but I can't get raw milk, even though the numbers are so skewed in favor of that being legalized.
If we can wrap our brains around the bioactives in raw milk that are so incredibly protective. Raw milk does 3 things. It nourishes completely, it protects, and it directs. Does 3 things. The protection and direction part are destroyed by heat and pasteurization. Some of the nutrition is as well. But if you look at that, let's talk about something really quickly here that's so important. Let's wrap our brains around something. What does safe mean? Does safe mean sterilized without any possibility of a bacteria, no bioactives, inert space food? The Russians don't believe that, by the way. The Russians have different kind of food in space than we eat. But the point I'm trying to say here is sterile gives you a bubble of trouble. If you think about safety, is it safe for your body to be susceptible to any threat coming because you've sterilized yourself? No, it is not. So reformat the entire concept of what safety is to think, I want to have biodiversity in my gut. That's the basis for fighting inflammation, by the way, and basis of our immune system. 80% of our immune system is the biodiversity of gut bacteria in your gut. 80%. And the gut structures, the mucosal lining and all that stuff. So what is safety? Well, safety to me and people that really embrace raw milk is the resiliency, the ability to adapt to threats. So you don't get sick from what you eat out there that's in the rest of the world, right? And even raw milk, you have less of a problem if it happens to have a bad bug in it. because you have a resilient immune system that's adaptive to those threats. And the bioactives, which are antivirus and antibacterial and all kinds of things, which protect, are very protective as well. So reframing the idea of safety is important. This morning, major outbreak announced on boar's head deli meats. Hundreds of people sickened and people dead and everything from deli meats and listeria. In the European Union, they actually allow a listeria in their food and in their raw milk. And you don't see the problems we have in America. Yes, they've got problems here and there. But the bottom line is they embrace diversity in Europe and embrace the whole food that comes from farmers markets. Look in France, in Paris, they mandate the farmers markets in every one of their courts, what they call it, arrondissement. I can't even say it. In every one of their districts in Paris has mandatory farmers markets. So the idea that what is our country doing on the governmental side? Is it protecting industry, or is it thinking about protecting its people? And if you think about Europe, it has a different social contract with its civilization, or its population, I should say, because socialized medicine pays for everybody. But wouldn't it be smarter to have healthy people so you don't have to pay for socialized medicine? There's a different social contract. It's not a money-making proposition. It's a money-spending proposition. They don't want to spend money, so let's protect against it. In the United States, socialized medicine, we don't have that. It's a illness care business that's profit-driven. So we have a different social contract. We don't really have one. We have an industrialization of healthcare, which is actually causing a crisis because in 1961, 6% of our GMP was dedicated to healthcare. Now it's 25 to 26%. That's insane. So you won't have enough nurses, hospitals, doctors, drugs, surgeons to take care of this. You have to prevent it. And that's where farmers over pharmacies comes from. And I believe that we are in that paradigm shift right now. It's early, but we're climbing that mountain and we're getting success at every rock outcliff we get to because the view is better and the air is cleaner and the things are better, right? But it's pissing off the FDA because it's not according to their policies, their procedures, where all claims on food have to be from drugs. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act says if you make a claim on food, it becomes a drug. You just push the drug and you better have a license for that approved by us. So that's why they get so upset. From me, on our website, we can't do anything about what we're talking about today. This is yours, not mine. And I can say whatever I want on yours because you control it, and that's freedom of speech. Thank God we've got at least that for the most part. The bottom line is I don't have freedom to speak and educate on our websites. We do a little bit on our nonprofit, the Raw Milk Institute, but I can never mention my brand. But all the wonderful research coming out of Europe and the PubMed stuff, the study I talked about from 2021 in December, Dr. Lynn, none of that can be talked about because they are absolutely and completely kidnapped the concept of food as medicine.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind there is the idea that big food, big pharma, big ag, big healthcare make zero or very, very little money on a healthy person. So you mentioned the sick care system. It's like if you're a healthy person that lives in a decentralized way and you get your milk from a farm like yours, you get your food from a farm like down the street, you grow your own vegetables, you do this stuff, you have that biodiversity, you have that resilience that makes you healthy, which then lowers the amount of money or time that you spend in these healthcare things, and then you don't have to do it. So that to me is like, it's so crystal clear when you think about why they would push things that would increase the resilience and the health, because they don't make any money. Where would they get their money from? Where would the profit come from? And it just makes so much sense to me when you put it that way.
Well, it's driven to almost a level of sickness. I've said this on one of the podcasts, but I'll say it again here. HPI, the avian flu situation with cows in America, has not made anyone sick. 0 people sick from consumption of raw milk. None. In fact, I know of a farmer that accidentally had HPI in his herd, and the people drank their milk and had no problems whatsoever. And that matches with the science because the science says that it's not a foodborne disease. It's not like norovirus. It is actually a respiratory thing. And we don't go around inhaling raw milk. So we don't snort it, right? It might be white, but we don't snort it. Yeah. So the bottom line is the FDA just gave Moderna $176 million to make an HPI vaccination for human beings. And if you read deeper in it, follow the money. They spent the last 7 months creating this whirlwind of what about HPI? What about HPI and raw milk? Everybody's going to get sick. when they haven't had illnesses from H-pie at all. In fact, it lacks the genetic trait to make the jump to humans. But yet they give Moderna $176 million to make an mRNA vaccination that nobody wants anyway, to take care of last year's virus when raw milk takes care of next year's threat. It's adaptive and resilient to next year's problem. So we have a fundamental disconnect in the money side of the policies in America, and the fact that Moderna and other big vaccination people start losing money now because they don't have a pandemic anymore. They need a new crisis to fix. So why not create one that doesn't exist? Now, I will give you this. When we had COVID, we had 1 million people die. I get it. We do. That was a crisis. We don't have a crisis with H-pie. And with H5, that's one, no crisis, but they are creating one because they need it to make more money to stay alive as an industrial pharmaceutical company. That's the sickness of what's going on here.
Yeah, it's twisted for sure. There's the Monsanto, it parallels in Monsanto and glyphosate, in my opinion. As far as I understand the story and the creation of glyphosate, Monsanto made Agent Orange for the Vietnamese War, and they had this crisis. It was a cash cow because they had all this Agent Orange. Bam, bam, bam. War ends. They come back. They need another cash cow. So they go with glyphosate and they create that, and then look at all the negatives that's affected, or that's induced rather. It's just It's interesting how the crisis creation is extremely profitable for these companies. And then the other thing is, like, what would happen if the FDA gave 177 or 176 million dollars to farms like yourself?
Oh my God. We could rapidly advance pathogen testing technologies, probably get the test down to 8 or 12 hours, including enrichment and accuracy, and actually have farmers thrive, consumers thrive, and we would actually have preventative medicine going on through nutrition in America and bioactives. And yes, we'd still need pharmaceuticals for antibiotics here and there and this, that, and the other thing. And we still need trauma centers, but we would be depressurizing our healthcare system to the point where we'd actually have healthy, thriving people that are not chronically ill with inflammation driving everything nuts. There doesn't seem to be any voice for that. I'm one of them, you're one of them, but it's not a voice coming from the medical societies or the medical institutions or the FDA or CDC at all. Now, if you talk to their scientists, there's a bunch of them that agree with us. They're the ones that did the studies. But when you ask those scientists, and I know a lot of them at the International Milk Genomics Consortium, they'll say, a hungry mouth cannot freely speak. What does that mean? If I start talking, I'm going to lose my job.
100%.
And that's exactly what's going on. We've got institutionalization of these grant systems that perpetuate what's in power. And so when I go to the microphone at the IMGC and ask these hard questions, I'm the only one in the place that can speak, because everybody else is dependent on their paycheck to shut their mouth. And everybody loves to talk to me because I speak the truth. I speak the hard questions and ask the hard questions that get good apply themselves to the technology they're actually talking about. And every one of them laments the damage done by homogenization and pasteurization. They say it screws it all up. They actually use the F word. They F it up big time, And they're the first ones that say that heat destroys the bioactives that are so critical to the value of breast milk and the breast milk banks. The most progressive ones now are saying, I'm not going to heat anymore. We're just going to freeze and do testing. They're kind of following what we do. Mm-hmm. We just released a whole pet food line nationally that's frozen raw milk. And we have people just clamoring for it. And pretty powerful what's going on now. I think that mountain you're talking about is being climbed as we speak. I think that the freedom to speak and say the truth has not been yet too suppressed. That's good. But it's going to come from people like you and others, Dr. Paul Saladino and others, that are going to talk about what really worked in their lives. I know of a bunch of people that were so close to having surgery for Crohn's disease to take out part of their intestine and poop in a plastic bag the rest of their lives. Instead of doing that, they got onto the olive oil and avocados and raw milk kefir and the anti-inflammatory gut foods that are whole food nutrition. And within literally 6 to 8 weeks, the symptoms subsided. And within 6 months, they had no sign of it whatsoever. So we can really control our futures through our nutrition and the bioactives we have in our food. And raw milk's a big part of that. It always has been for the last 10,000 years. This last 100 years is where the car wrecks happened.
Yeah, you mentioned something there, breast milk. I heard you speak on another podcast about that, which is something I never thought about. When a baby consumes breast milk straight from the breast, it's technically raw milk.
It's not technically. It is mammalian raw milk, 100%.
Yeah, but nobody makes a fuss about it. In fact, as you mentioned, it's encouraged. Like, hey, babies need to drink raw milk. So where's the disparity there? Why do you think it's like willful blindness? It's like, oh, well, maybe not that.
According to the people that know this best, the lactation consultants and people that we work with at the International Milk Genomics Consortium, UC Davis, the FDA turns a blind eye to breast milk. They ignore it. They just don't go there. They don't go there. That is actually the bridge of peace. That is the bridge of understanding what we're talking about. The World Health Organization, the United Nations, the American Medical Association, the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, all the nursing organizations, all the pediatricians, the gynecologists, the OBs, the obstetric, everybody agrees that breastfeeding is fantastic for kids. Breastfeed as long as you can. Because of a laundry list of these bioactives we're talking about. It goes on and on and on and ad nauseum about how fantastic it is, including better college test scores on the SATs. I mean, they go on and on about how fantastic, lower asthma, this, that, and the other thing, fewer flus. Okay, that's mammalian raw milk, guys. The same thing you're saying about that can be said about goats, cows, sheep, horses, camels, and reindeer, and for the last 10,000 years. In fact, Dr. David Dallas was one of the PhDs, there's another one as well from the Netherlands, spoke at length about the similarities between bovine raw milk and breast milk. Qualitatively, they're almost identical. In other words, the kind of proteins and bacteria and everything, qualitatively. Quantitatively, they're a little different. In other words, you'll have more fat, but the fat's the same. It's the same kind of fat, but just different levels of it. And that is why there's been almost a perfect marriage, in my opinion, it is a perfect marriage, between raw cow's milk and other mammalian milk and humans for the last 10,000 years. The ancient Hindus said the cow is the mother of the universe. And the reason that is because her raw milk would replace the mother's breast milk if the mother died or didn't have enough. So let me tell you something. It's a paradigm that's rolling on truth here, guys. It really is. And the FDA just cannot stand it. They freak out about the fact that we're successful when they're telling everybody to run for the hills, and people are saying they run to stores and get it, or they run to the farmer and get it, because they know the truth and the lies they've been told. And the crying wolf effect is not working anymore.
I have a story that's, I think you're going to love this. So my grandfather was born in Payne, Ohio, small town, very, very small rural town. He was born on a farm in a barn.
Jesus.
And this is important. He was a 13-pound baby. He was a massive baby. He just incredible. 13 point like something 2 pounds. Born in a barn, natural birth. When was he born? In the 40s. So not not a lot of modern birthing techniques and drugs and stuff like that. He was so big that he really hurt his mother. His mother got badly injured.
For her. Yep.
Yeah, had to go to the hospital. She did. What do you think that he drank when she was in the hospital?
Probably the cows and goat's milk right there. What do you think?
The raw cow's milk straight from the farm that he was living on. And he's 86 years old right now and still chugging along. So I just think that's an incredible story that speaks to what I know him. I've spoken to him about this exact instance. That's a real thing that happened. It's
true, and it's been historically true for the millennia, for the ages. Romans talked about it. The Greeks talked about it. Hippocrates talked about it. Jesus talked about it in Land of Milk and Honey. I mean, it has been the partner food for humans for a long, long time, and given a tremendous competitive advantage to those that did drink raw milk. And many societies around the world did. I mean, the Mongolians drink raw milk, and they still do now with their horses. And the Maasai, black as you can imagine, they'll always win the Olympic marathons. They drink raw milk from the cows there in the Maasai in Kenya, and all over the world. And it's very interesting. Goats, cows, sheep, horses, reindeer, camels have been domesticated and utilized as co-partners. And the scientists that studied this said that animal gave the people a portable whole food nutrition. You didn't have to have anything else to survive today. The children stopped dying and crying, and you didn't have to hunt or fish. You could do that. But raw milk was what you had right now. And you weren't hungry tonight. And by the way, old raw milk is called cheese. And cheese is all over the place. I mean, it's really deep in the humanity forever. So, yeah, industrial follow the money story is pretty much not doing so well in the face of what we're doing right now. And they're upset.
Yeah, milk. Another thing that you just mentioned, milk was replenishable as well. You didn't have to go kill an animal and then go hunt and kill another animal. You just took care
Correct.
of your of your cow.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so all this to say, I mean, I'm fascinated by this. I'm certain I've had raw milk. I drink raw milk whenever I get it. In Texas, it's a little bit harder to find than you may expect, but we make ends meet. I'm curious because I have friends that I've spoke to this about. Um, what would you, somebody who's on the fence or who's had this long, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years of programming that raw milk is extremely dangerous, and they're curious about maybe exploring it, what would you say to them? What would be the incentive or the compelling reason to take the jump?
That's a very, very good question, Nolan. It really, really is. Um, the concept of raw milk being so dangerous is enculturated into our society. When I would stand in front of a farmer's market table in Los Angeles, we used to sell a lot of raw milk there. We don't do it anymore because we couldn't afford the time to do that. We had 10 stores that needed delivery immediately and not wait around talking to people. But we did it for like 15 years. We would have this beautiful young mom come up who had a broken English. She had a hard accent. And lo and behold, it was either German or Ukrainian or Russian or South American or some kind of accent. And her body was statuesque. Teeth were beautiful. She wasn't overweight. She was clear-minded, beautiful. Her children were well-behaved. Her children were not running around scatterbrained. They were well-behaved, holding her hand, listening to me. And she would say, I'd like 8 gallons of milk like I got back home. And she would go away and be very happy. And she'd come back the next week. Now, the next mom that would come up was not so much that way. Teeth problems, overweight, sometimes diabetic. You know the picture. It's the American Walmart story, right? And her kids were running around ADD, sucking on sugar. And she goes, I don't think I want to have raw milk. Isn't it dangerous? I said, you know what? You need to go have lunch with that mom that just left and figure this out. Because raw milk is a phenomenally healing food. You've just been trained in your mind, your body, and your soul that it's something to be hated, or something to be despised, or it's incomplete, it's roadkill, it's raw, something bad with it, something wrong with it. So you really have to acknowledge the fact that we have a deep cultural training that's been indoctrinated into us by our educational systems, by our institutions, by the regulations, by the statute, by the FDA, by the NIH, by CDC, by the pasteurized milk brands. It's all we've known. So we have a lot of teaching to do. And when you have immigrants that come in, they help us understand. When you have influencers are driving this market crazy because they're able to explain what's going on in a way that's friendly, non-threatening, and backed up by hard science and their own personal experience. When you have Tori Spelling, movie star Tori Spelling, with her 5 kids running around, and she loves her raw milk, and she talks about her experience with the kids loving it and doing so well with it. There's 1 million followers behind her that want to be more like her. You have Julia Roberts, that same kind of thing. Danica Patrick. You've got Patrick Dempsey. You've got Martin Sheen. You've just got a lot of people out there, and untold numbers of non-movie star people, but are TikTok or YouTube or whatever. They're talking about their own experiences with their kids and the asthma going away, or the inflammation going away, their eczema going away. And people want to be like them. So this is an influencer-driven thing because influencers are outside of the paradigm of the current power structure. The influencers are actually creating their own power structure. And I think it's the most democratic, wonderfully dynamic, humanity-driven, compassionate thing that tells the truth to people that can make their own decisions. And so as we battle to climb the mountain here, it's going to be influencers and independent thinkers. And I'll give credit to the chiropractors and DOs, the doctors of osteopathy. They're actually being trained in their medical schools about what the gut microbiome is and what the Human Genome Project was, where you don't see that in the UCLA medical schools up until the last 5 years. They weren't talking about those things. When you start talking about raw breast milk and biodiversity and genomics and proteomics and lipidomics and all these things going on in the gut and what makes an immune system and the Human Genome Project, You start training your doctors differently. We start to see this just now in the last couple of years coming through, but it's not supported by pharmaceuticals that want to keep on pushing drugs. So you see in their continuing education as doctors, which is pushed by pharmaceuticals, they're detrained or they become detracted by what they're trained in medical school. So there's a battle between farmers and pharmacies. That's what's going on right now.
It's incredible. I mean, I'm already in line with you, but like I can't see how that would not be a compelling reason for somebody to. In fact, I'll reword that. To me, that is a compelling reason, a compelling argument, at the very least, to explore raw milk. And then the other thing about this that I think is worth mentioning for me is like the what's it called, like the artichoke effect or whatever it is, where like you peel one layer and you're like, oh wait, raw milk, and then you start looking into grass-fed meat, and then you start looking into all these other things. But it is a compelling enough argument, in my opinion, to check out raw milk and to consider it. Which leads me to my next question for the person that's living in a city, maybe in a state where it's not super easy, you can't go to the store. How do they go about sourcing it? What would be your recommendation to them to take that step and get their hands and their mouths on raw milk?
Well, you said the first thing, very important, to be open-minded. If you are suffering chronic inflammation, if you're having problems, your kids are also going to have those problems. You need to think holistically about your family's health in every generation, from newborn to when you're going to die. Think about that. If you're open-minded and you want to learn about how your body actually functions and look at the blueprints of life, I would strongly look at the rawmilkinstitute.org, rawmilkinstitute.org. We have trained thousands of farmers internationally, exposed farmers to training internationally, including 175 dairies in Great Britain did their training in 2018. But we've got, I think, about close to 50 farmers in the United States, all through the United States. And we don't ask questions about whether it's legal or not. We just want to make sure it's safe. And we have 35 of those dairymen that actually have on-farm labs doing their own testing. So we've actually set the benchmark pretty high. And all the other dairymen that may not be listed or certified by Raw Milk Institute, many of them follow our standards because they're kind of too lazy to go through the process. And that's okay, whatever. As long as they end up with low-risk raw milk, we're good with that. So what I would do as a customer of thought, a person who's going to be reaching out and thinking about how they can access safe raw milk or low risk raw milk, I would look at Raw Milk Institute, look at those 50 farmers that we have there, start out there. If you don't have that, then you go to the realmilk.com website and look for raw milk access internationally, state by state, country by country, and see where you have a local dairyman that's producing raw milk for human consumption. But when you go visit, I say the word visit because you need to go visit them. You need to make sure that they are presentable, they're clean. They not only have painted their barn and presentable to the public, but inside their milk barn, how are they maintaining their equipment? How do they prepare their udders? Do they follow the Raw Milk Institute standards? And if they don't, what do they do? But at least you have the common standards that we have at Raw Milk Institute to take to them and say, you know what, I really want raw milk, but I want to make sure it's as safe as it can be. What do you do to assure safety? And have them explain it to you. Because if they've been serving humanity for a while and consumers, they've had that question asked of them, and they should have a good answer. So that's what I would suggest you do. And by the way, I've been all over the world. And I've spoken on this subject many, many times all over the place. Been interviewed countless times. And everywhere I've gone to speak, I've always found raw milk, even though it's been illegal. I found it in Hawaii. I was there at National Farmers Union back in 2017, and it was down the road 2 miles. There was a 3-cow dairy that had a deal, and I went in there and got raw milk. So, even in Ontario, Canada, there's raw milk. There's raw milk in Mexico. Although I would be very careful going into third world countries because of the tuberculosis and brucellosis issues and the lack of testing. So there's some concerns there, and we have to work very hard in third world countries and second world countries that may not have some of the technology to make sure that cows don't have zoonotic diseases that we would assume don't even happen in America. But nonetheless, raw milk is accessible if you want it. And I would embrace people to please stop drinking the Kool-Aid of pharmaceuticals. We need to reserve pharmaceuticals when we absolutely need them, and we need to prevent the use of them by using deep nutrition and bioactives and whole food nutrition so we can be healthy people without being drug dependent or medication dependent. Medications are wonderful, but they should be narrowed down to where they should actually be confined and used when needed, not as a solution to all of the ailments coming on and more coming on every day because you don't have your act together physiologically in your body. So farmers over pharmacies is the mountain we're climbing here. And it's wonderful because we get more and more progress every day because people are seeing what we're saying, the science we're saying, as true. And they're seeing the FDA, CDC as either misleading, partially true, or absolutely a straight up lie, a protective lie for their partners at the big processing industry, which are losing market share. And lots of market share is not a fun thing for these people to suffer. They're having a hell of a time with that. So they have a problem in their failure to adapt themselves. They could give me a run for my market, let me tell you right now. If they put their scientists together and put their money together and actually did a good job on run up, they could probably do quite well. But I tell you what, they're not willing, able to think and adapt and be resilient to the demands of science and the demands of their customers.
It's a heck of an answer. This question just came to me because I want to be able to better articulate and share this message in a simple, concise way. And who better to answer this question than you, if it's possible? If you could summarize raw milk in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Breast milk is raw milk, and there's no contest anywhere that breast milk isn't fantastic for you, for your babies.
There you have it.
Breast milk is mammalian milk. Breast milk has the same kinds of attributes that cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep milks, and many of the mammalian milks have. So I think the bridge of truth is actually breast milk.
That's a great answer. I mean, I want to say this. Your passion and your excitement and the eagerness with which you share this information and the level of care and consideration you've put into this topic is so, it legitimately inspires me. I'm feeling juiced up right now. So I want to thank you as adamantly as I can for doing that and for literally spending the better part of your life on this mission, because it's important stuff and it's just incredible to see.
Thank you so much, Nolan. And it's an absolute pleasure to speak to an influencer who's teaching people, because it's about teaching and it's about opening people's minds to another possibility. And I tell you what, it's nothing more rewarding in my life than the purpose I've been given doing what I'm doing, because it gives me tremendous value to do what I'm doing. So thank you so much, and great day today. And let's climb that mountain together. It's awesome.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.